Hello, welcome back to my channel. For a while now, I have been getting a ton of questions about the doll featured in some of my videos and on Instagram. I had recorded a doll making video last summer, but unfortunately lost the footage due to a crushed phone. So this will be the second 1/18 scale doll that I have made. This is the doll that I will be customizing. She is Body Coon from Amazon. This doll is actually designed to be a body armature for drawing, and that's why she is designed to bend to any form or pose. This is the main feature that drew me to purchase this armature. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to customize her the way I imagined, but figured it would be a fun project regardless, and she actually turned out better than I expected. A couple of little booklets were included in the box. I just ended up throwing them away. There isn't much relative information in them. She also came with a set of props, clearly intended to aid artists in realistic depictions of action scenes. The set includes a katana, pistol, flip phone, laptop, and some other random. Also objects that I will most likely never use, but I'll be keeping them just in case. One of the most exciting things about this doll is her interchangeable hands. When you enjoy figure photography like I do, or just enjoy having a realistic rider to go with your model horses, it's extremely useful to have a variety of options for hand poses. When I took her out of the plastic, her right arm immediately fell off. I wasn't too worried because she's easy to take apart and put back together. I was able to put the arm back into place, but the shoulder piece is a bit snug, making for a stiff joint. I thought about writing the company about it, but it's not a big deal. I really love how easy it is to bend this armature into pretty much any position. It's going to be the perfect addition to my little horse farm diorama. That stiff shoulder is going to make things a touch difficult, but I'm not terribly worried. First things first. She's currently wearing a pair of angry fists, so I'm going to give her some much more personable hands. There, that's better. So this model doesn't arrive in the box at 1/18 scale. She's just a touch larger than the horses I like to have in my collection. This was disappointing at first, as my hopes were so high for this rider. But I wasn't ready to give up on my project, so I decided to take drastic measures. Using a small hacksaw, I went ahead and chopped off her legs. A little creepy, I know, but it had to be done. I removed a portion of her thighs and eventually her calves as well. Who really needs those super long legs anyways? After reducing her height by a smidgen, I decided to cut down her torso as well. Once I got her down to a more reasonable size, I glued her all back together using Pasco Fix industrial adhesive. It's a contact glue, so you have to place things where you want them quickly, but it does work quite well. If I wasn't so impatient, I probably would have used some epoxy sculpt to fill and smooth out the reconstructed areas. Maybe later on. She's going to be wearing clothes all the time anyways. So here she is after a little extreme reconstructive surgery. I decided to remove the shoulder piece that just wasn't fitting right. It's not totally necessary to keep it, so I just saved myself the trouble. Now on to the fun part. Before adding any kind of paint, I like to pencil out the features on her face. You can really see just how tiny her face is in comparison to my pencil eraser. It's time to hunt down the world's smallest paintbrush. I don't actually have a single bristle brush other than the one I made myself by cutting away all the other bristles. I am using airbrush paint for this project because it's such a thin, yet highly saturated paint. It goes on nice and flat without any beveling. I don't mind that her eyebrows are slightly different because it just seems to add to her expression. But that's not the case when it comes to the eyes. Getting them perfectly symmetrical is a chore. I start with the pupils and then move on to the outline. There's a little bit of a guide on the doll's face, but for the most part she's featureless and I just sort of have to make it up as I go. For some reason I always struggle the most with the left eye. At this point, I'm realizing that she's maybe looking a little Egyptian around the eyes, which is definitely not my intention. I didn't want to wash away the whole eye and start again, so I came up with an alternative solution. This is a hook that came with a modeling kit that I got. It works perfectly to clean up any unwanted paint or small deviations, and the surface of the doll is hard enough that it doesn't scratch. There, that's better. Now I'm adding some definition to her eyelids using a shade of airbrush paint that's slightly darker than her skin tone. After that, I painted the whites of her eyes. I filled her irises with a dark shade of blue. I realized immediately that the color lacked depth. Her eyes just look so flat and lifeless at this point. I ended up layering with a lighter greenish color, leaving a ring of dark blue around the outer circle. Adding pupils was tricky as well. If they're not perfectly symmetrical, her eyes would seem out of focus. I hope we can all just ignore this incident where I almost destroyed everything and gave up on art forever. Fortunately, her face stayed put, so moving on. I added some eyelashes here and there, then decided to add the glint of light in her eyes. I know this is more of a two-dimensional trick for drawing and painting, but I couldn't help myself. At this point, I was thinking there wasn't a whole lot more I could do with her eyes. But after a little cleanup, I decided on a whim to do some more shading. Using brown oil pastel and a clay modeling tool, I added a little eyeshadow. Next comes the lips. I traced the outline of her mouth with a pencil first, getting a good idea of where I wanted to paint. I want this doll to look content, and the subtlest difference in the shape of her mouth will change her expression immensely. Mixing up the perfect shade of pink took quite a while, and I ended up wasting a lot of paint, but finally ended up with a color that I was satisfied with. If you've been enjoying this video so far, please help my channel out by hitting the thumbs up button. I appreciate all the support in the YouTube community, and I am truly grateful to all of my subscribers. I noticed that her skin seemed a little pale, so I added some warmth and color to her face using dry oil pastels and a makeup brush. Before I could drop her again, I got out the clear sealant to preserve her face. The sealant is matte rather than glossy, so it will really nicely reduce the shine on her face and give her skin a nice finish. Yes, I can say I'm pretty happy with how her face turned out. So after deshining her, I got the gloss varnish out to add life back to her eyes and mouth. After it dried, her eyes looked so much better, shining in the light of my desk lamp. Now that that's all finished, I will be making hair for the doll. Materials I used were Mod Podge, plastic wrap, and brown yarn. I began by wrapping a good length of yarn around the width of my hand, then cutting it all into a similar length. I clamped the yarn evenly in a kitchen clip, and then used a baby hair comb to begin brushing out the twists. I curried a lot of yarn fluff in the process, but eventually ended up with a nice fan of pretty brown doll hair. At this point, I could use an iron or hair straightener to straighten the hair, but I actually like how wavy it is. Next, I taped a stretch of plastic wrap down to the table. I separated out a section of hair, then Mod Podged it down to the plastic wrap with a pretty thick coat of glue, making what they call in the hair world a weft. It's hard to get it just right, but in the end it doesn't really need to look perfect in this stage. I made more wefts than I needed and let them dry for about 2 hours. You could make a cap to glue these wefts to for a removable wig, but I didn't really see the need with this doll. So, I decided to glue them directly to her head with liquid super glue. I started with her center part. You don't want to see the glue part when you adhere them to the doll's head, so you want to place it where you want it, and then comb the weft over the dried Mod Podge. It doesn't take many sections of hair to begin covering the doll's head. I didn't want to add too many because then her hair would be so thick and fluffy that it would be unnaturally voluminous. I used the same glue, then comb over technique for the other side of her center part. Next, I glue some hair pieces to the back of her head. Even with only 8 wefts, her hair is so fluffy, it will need to be tamed a bit. This is the fun hairstylist part where I decide whether I want to cut her hair and how to style it. I like her hair down, so I decided just to do a layover braid to tame her unruly hair. I tied it off with a bit of brown thread. I can always change a hairstyle later on if I get the urge. Now for a little trim. On to making clothes. Honestly, I was dreading this part. I really don't have a whole lot of patience for making teeny tiny clothes, and I wasn't even really sure what I was going to do. So I decided to start with the one thing that I already knew I wanted. I cut a small circle of cloth from an old black t-shirt, then rubber banded it around her head at the depth I wanted the cap portion of the hat. Oops, I almost forgot about wrapping her head in plastic wrap first. Then clamped it down and saturated the cap portion with a thick layer of Mod Podge. Then I let it dry. I repeated this process 3 times with 3 layers of Mod Podge. When it was all cured, I pulled the rubber band off. I am happy to see how well it's holding its shape. Next, I used my hair straightener to iron the ruffles out of the brim of the hat. Then I began Mod Podging the brim of the hat flat down to the plastic wrap. Before it was totally dry, I scraped some black oil pastel dust onto the surface. This helped give it more of a matte, sort of velvety look. It looks pretty good, I think, but it definitely needs a trim around the edges. I played around with some shaping for a while, then set to making a little hat band. I just trimmed a slim piece of brown paper, then glued it around the base. Now for the coat making portion. I drew inspiration from a sheet of brown felt that I had stashed away and decided to go with a sort of rustic look. As you can see, I had made her a pair of jeans with a belt, but was unhappy with the way the fabric frayed at the seams and eventually just scrapped them. I outlined the doll's torso and shoulders. Next, I flipped her around and mirrored the pattern, drawing a cut line for the coat's opening. Adding some additional fabric around the silhouette will give me room to sew. I will now sew the sides of the coat together. The pen markings won't be visible because the coat is being sewed together inside out. After that, I cut pieces of felt to make the sleeves and sewed them. Next, I attached them to the arm openings in the body of the coat. Once I got all the main sewing done, I used some needle nose pliers to turn the whole coat right side out. I'm pretty satisfied with how it's turning out. It took me a while before I figured out what to use for the sherpa. This is a scrap of cloth I cut from an old stuffed animal. I think it looks just right. I went ahead and sewed that down as well. Seeing the coat fit so well on the doll was really rewarding. Now onto the details. Using gold thread, I just added a little embroidery around the hem and on the cuffs. So now I'll be making the pants. The jeans fabric that I sewed before just really wanted to unravel on me, so I chose this fabric instead. I used the same method when cutting out the fabric, tracing the doll's form, and then leaving some room for the stitching. Then I went ahead and got them all sewed together inside out. Now I'll be making the boots. This was the hardest and also the most satisfying part. Using an extremely sharp X-Acto knife, I skived down the surface of the leather to a few extremely thin pieces. I don't think I know anyone who really enjoys skiving leather due to the intense frustration and increased stress levels, but unfortunately it is just a part of life in the model horse world. After taking some measurements, I cut out some strips to use for the calf of the boot. Then I took a piece of cardstock and traced the doll's feet, cutting out the outline. These will be the interior soles. I wrapped the thin leather under and glued it down to the bottom of the cardstock cutout. To make the toe of the boot, I soaked some leather in water to improve elasticity and began shaping it around the doll's toes. Next, I sanded the bottom of the boot, making an even, smooth surface. I added some glue, then attached the sole of the boot. It's just some cardstock that I colored black. I decided to rough up the toe a bit to make it look a little more worn. Then cut out and glued the tongue of the boot. Now they're really starting to look like boots. So I lost the mechanical pencil that I used to punch holes in leather and had to come up with a similarly effective strategy. Adding dots of superglue where I want to punch the holes makes the leather brittle. Then, punching a hole with an awl creates a nice permanent hole that won't heal back together. So I accidentally punched 6 holes on one side and 5 on the other. I don't know how I made that mistake. I guess I will just skip a hole when I lace them up. To make the bootlace grommets, I am using extremely tiny soldering wire. It's so tiny I can break it between my fingers. Curling it around a slightly larger wire makes a circle, which I then snip off with scissors. Using tweezers, I dipped each grommet in superglue and then placed it over each hole. Oh my gosh, let me tell you, it was really not as easy as it looks. After that, I laced the boots with a needle and brown thread. So I'm just going to take a second to credit the extremely talented Daisy Stalls on Instagram for the laced boot idea. She is awesome. She has an amazing channel on YouTube as well, so if you aren't already following her, then you're missing out. I decided to make a belt to go over her coat and around her waist. After punching some holes, I then cut a notch for the tongue of the buckle. Next, I made the buckle out of copper wire. If you're wondering why my video lighting keeps changing, that would be my toddler Marcus. Sometimes I don't notice when he's playing with the settings on my desk lamp. Making the tongue was a simple matter of bending the end of some wire into a circle. Using my soldering kit, I fused the wire together so the buckle will never fall apart. I have been learning a lot about soldering from another talented acquaintance on Instagram, but I admit I am still quite a novice. It's not perfect, but I know it won't come apart anytime soon. Push the leather up through the first hole, push the tongue through the groove, then glue the leather down to itself on the other side. And here she is, all finished. I will definitely be giving her an entirely new and improved outfit come spring, and probably a new hairstyle as well. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching this miniature writer experiment to its conclusion. Until next time!